So in 1620, this simple one-page document was signed on a ship, and it would, believe it or not, change the course of history. We're talking about the story of the Mayflower Compact, a really radical plan born from sheer desperation that planted the very first seeds of American self-government.
But first, let me ask you something. What happens when the rules just vanish? No laws, no government, no one in charge. Because that was the exact and frankly terrifying reality for a group of settlers nearly 400 years ago. All right, so to really get their solution, we first have to understand the people at the heart of this story and the incredibly dangerous journey they decided to take for just one single idea: freedom. Now, the people in this story weren't soldiers or adventurers. They were families. We know them today as the Pilgrims. And this group of over 100 men, women, and children were literally fleeing religious persecution in England. All they wanted was the freedom to worship their own way. And for that freedom, they were willing to risk everything by boarding a single ship, the Mayflower, to cross a very dangerous ocean. And that voyage, it was a brutal ordeal. What was supposed to take a few weeks turned into 66 agonizing days. They were battered by fierce Atlantic storms, all packed into these cramped quarters. And when they finally spotted land, they realized they were hundreds of miles north of where they were supposed to be, in Virginia. But their challenges had only just begun. As a brutal New England winter started to set in, the cost of their journey became devastatingly clear. 50%. Half of the settlers would not survive that first winter. I mean, the stakes for this new colony could not have been higher. But as they were facing this overwhelming challenge of just physical survival, a second, equally dangerous crisis was brewing. You see, they weren't just stranded geographically, they were stranded legally. So picture this. They're on the Mayflower just off the coast of this new, unfamiliar land, and it hits them. Their legal charter, their permission slip to form a colony, was for Virginia. Here, in what is now Massachusetts, it was completely void. They were, for all intents and purposes, in a lawless land. Their situation was just dire. With their legal charter for Virginia now totally useless, they had no rules, no government, and no plan. It was a recipe for absolute chaos before they'd even set one foot on shore. Just try to imagine the overwhelming crisis they were up against. A brutal winter was coming, food was running out, sickness was spreading, and they had no houses or shelter. And on top of all that, there was no one in charge and no laws to follow. Their entire project was on the verge of complete collapse. But out of that crisis came this moment of genius. Faced with total collapse, the settlers decided that if there were no rules, well, they'd just have to create their own. This became their new plan for survival. They called it the Mayflower Compact, and it was a deceptively simple document, just a formal agreement written and signed right there on the ship. Its purpose was radical: to create a new, self-governing community from scratch, one that would be based on laws they themselves would create. The compact really boiled down to 3 core promises. First, they all pledged to work together as a single community. Second, they would create fair and equal laws for the good of everyone, not just for a select few. And third, and this is the most crucial part, they all agreed to obey those laws. In that single moment, something pretty incredible happened. A group of ordinary people, stranded thousands of miles from home, just decided to rule themselves. This wasn't a king or some distant government telling them what to do. It was the people creating their own government. It's a foundational idea that you can trace in a direct line, right to the Declaration of Independence over 150 years later. And that one act of creating their own rules didn't just ensure their survival. No, it planted the seeds of an idea that would eventually grow into a nation. But a plan on paper can't protect you from a harsh wilderness. The colony's actual survival was made possible only by the essential help of the native Wampanoag people, and especially a man named Squanto. He taught the struggling settlers vital skills: how to grow native crops like corn, where to fish, and how to hunt in this new environment. Without this critical alliance, their compact and their colony would have absolutely failed. And this right here is the true legacy of the Mayflower Compact. Look, it wasn't a constitution, and it didn't create a modern democracy. But what it did was introduce a revolutionary idea, that a government's authority comes from the consent of the people. It was the very first seed of that concept to be planted on American soil, And that leaves us with a final thought. This promise to work together, create fair laws, and live by them was made on a tiny ship in a moment of utter desperation. But those core ideas are still with us. So the question is, how do you see those same promises shaping the rules and communities that you are a part of today?